Abba Father, in the name of Yeshua, we come before your throne here on this Sabbath. We bless you. We thank you, Abba, for this Sabbath day, this day of rest, that we can come and commune with you and together by your Ruach HaKodesh, your Holy Spirit, Abba. We pray now, Yahweh, that every unclean spirit be out of this place. This is sanctified time, and we pray that your Spirit will have a full reign over this service and our fellowship here together. Let everything that is done here be done in accordance to your word and in accordance to your spirit of truth, Yahweh, and that, Yahweh, that nothing be done here that would be displeasing to you. I pray, Yahweh, for a spirit of unity amongst the brethren that is so sorely needed in these end times. And I pray for those who are watching on the web that you will bless them as well on this Sabbath day, that all burdens will be removed from their Sabbath day, that there are supposed to be no burdens on the Sabbath. And I pray that everybody's burden has been laid to rest yesterday. So we just want to bless you and thank you. We ask that you will inspire the children that will go out now for study. We pray that you will protect them and be with them. We pray for those, Abba, who could not be with us today, who are ill, like the Tyndales, and we just pray for a speedy recovery for them, Yahweh, that they may join us again next week. So we just want to bless you and thank you, and I just pray, Yahweh, that everything I speak today is based upon your word and as you intended it, as you gave it to me. In the name of Yeshua, Amen. Yeah, amen. All right, so they're going to disperse and then we'll get started. Today's subject is long-suffering, and I included forgiveness in this message because in order to truly have long-suffering, you really have to have the spirit of forgiveness as well. One doesn't really work very well without the other. If you're holding grudges against somebody and you're not forgiving them, then it's a little hard to be long-suffering with them, and you're going to be short-tempered and you're going to snap at them, and then we're going to have all kinds of problems. But at the end of the day, long-suffering and forgiveness really comes down to a decision. You're either going to deny yourself the right to rise up against the person, and sometimes justifiably, but that doesn't mean that you should do it. Paul says that all things are lawful for me, but not all things are expedient. In other words, not all things are necessarily profitable, even though there's been times when I could have said something to somebody that I maybe should have, but it wasn't necessarily that I should have either, because it could have had some very negative consequences, and therefore it's important to be able to search the Spirit to see what is speaking to you about how to deal with another person in the area of long-suffering and forgiveness, because sometimes there's a time to speak, as Solomon says, and sometimes there's a moment to stay quiet and to listen to first what the person is saying, because there may be extenuating circumstances that may change the context of how you have to deal with the person. But, I'm not going to try to make this cut and dry, because it's not. It's really quite a deep subject, and there's a lot of different ways to come at this. But, Hasatan always makes sure that he always has somebody who is in our life who's a thorn in our flesh, who just consistently creates problems and dramas in our life, and it really, really tests us to the max. And I tend to have a short fuse sometimes. I get really coarse because, sometimes to me what I see is something very simple and very logical. The way a person should behave towards a situation is not the way that they see it. And they get complicated. And so I can get a little bit agitated sometimes, and I have to really bring myself under control. I have to make a conscious decision to not allow it to get up underneath my skin and die. Because once that happens, it's just the boat goes down the river, and then I've got a lot of broken pieces that I'm going to have to fix. And it's my own fault, because I'm the one who had decided to entertain whatever the person was doing, and I didn't consider using long-suffering as part of the formula for dealing with a person. Instead, I wanted to entertain my anger. And that really speaks more to what's down inside of us, not so much what's in the other person. So we're going to take a look at some different aspects of long-suffering and forgiveness today, and I hope that when we get through this, you can glean something maybe out of this that you hadn't seen from another perspective before, and maybe you're going through something right now that this is a timely word for you. Because I would say pretty much all of us have somebody or groups of people who are really, really complicated in our lives, and they really, really test us. So this is something we have to be on guard with at all times. It's very, very important that we are very cognizant of this. And in order to acquire our divine purpose, it's important that we do not focus on the shortcomings of other people, because that is exactly the vehicle that Hasatan is going to use to come at you to try to disqualify you in your calling to Yeshua and whatever ministry that you might have. And so therefore, if you're just going to continue to self-sabotage yourself over and over again and go through this vicious cycle of defeat over and over again, why waste your time following the Messiah? You know, there's better things you can be doing in your life. So it's very important that we try to keep at the forefront of our minds at all times. Hasatan's going to come at us using people from different angles to try to catch us when we're off guard, and we need to have that full armor on at all times. Let's go on to long suffering, what it means. I've broken this down here. There's a few different words, but patience is one, okay? But also here, notice with long enduring temper, or it should be temperament. In other words, you're keeping your temper under control for an enduring period of time. You don't let it get out of check. You don't let it get out of control. It's something that you keep a lid on. Archie Bunker used to say, put a lid on it, you know? And that's what it really is saying, is put a lid on it. This is not about you getting angry and upset with another person. This is about you putting a lid on your own flesh. Work out your own problems before you start dealing with somebody else's issues. And there may be more dynamics going on in the life of that person that you just don't know yet, and you're judging it from the surface, and you're not judging it from the inwardness of the heart of what the person's going through. They may be dealing with a weakness in their flesh that they haven't been able to overcome yet, and we all are, and I include myself. So we'll deal a little more of that a little later. Also, inclining not to be harsh or strict, but merciful. And we all need mercy. Okay. In Galatians 5:22, long-suffering, in the Clark's commentary, it says, long-mindedness, bearing with the frailties and provocations of others from the consideration that Yahweh has borne long with our own. So, something to consider. And that if he had not, we would have been speedily consumed, bearing up also through all the troubles and difficulties of life without murmuring or repining, submitting cheerfully to every dispensation of Yahweh's providence, and thus deriving benefit from every occurrence. So in other words, what he's saying is, no matter what comes your way, at the end of the day, if you always stop and just think, what is happening to you at this moment is only happening because Yeshua has allowed it. We are bought with a price, and therefore we belong to Yeshua. And anything that happens to us at any given moment is only happening because it's been given permission. Therefore, you need to accept that as a fact. And when you can incorporate that concept into your belief system, when something is happening to you, it's much easier to go with the flow and let it work itself out in the way it's supposed to work itself out, instead of bucking and fighting and holding grudges. And in other words, you're not being long-suffering in the situation. It may very well be the very thing that has come into your presence is to simply expose a flaw within your character that Yahweh is trying to work out. Because at the end of the day, He is in the business of pruning the tree. And we go through phases where we have growth phases, and then we have phases where we go through where we're being pruned. We're being cut back so that we can produce more fruit. And so a lot of times in the flesh, we want to buck and fight against that. And that is not the design of this whole thing. Okay. Yahweh expects us to learn by His example. Let's look at some examples. So let's go to Romans chapter 9, verse 22 to 23. This is the interlinear enhanced translation. In other words, I'm adding words in here that the translators did not put in, but come from the original language. Verse 22, what if Yahweh wanted to show His wrath, that is a violent passion, and to make His power known, endured with much long suffering that is lenient to the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction. Verse 23, and that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels, like a wife who contributes to her husband's usefulness. Interesting wording here. Of mercy that is a tender and compassionate, which he had prepared beforehand for glory. So what it's saying is, prior to this, it's saying that we got a lot of wicked people out there, including ourselves, and if Yahweh was quick to entertain his anger, he would just snuff us out in a heartbeat, and we wouldn't be here. So the fact that he bestowed that kind of mercy and long-suffering and forgiveness on his part towards us, we are compelled by that same Spirit to do the same for others that are around us. It is a real challenge, because you really have to decide that what Yahweh wants to work through you is more important than what your flesh wants to work through you. So you have to deny yourself when these situations come up. What Yahweh is showing us is a level of righteousness by which he operates when he uses long-suffering and forgiveness, even in a time when it would call for him to take action against those who fight against him or are contrary to him. How many times have we wanted to lash out at a person who's gotten underneath our skin? I'm sure it happens almost, if not on a daily basis, at least a few times a week. Okay? And so the carnal nature wants to take over and push Yahweh out of the picture, push his Spirit out of the picture, and just take matters into its own hands. So again, as I was saying earlier, this is something we really, I think, is very important subject now, because when we look at prophecy, what we see is that when the end starts to actually take place, it says brother will rise up against brother, and they will offend one another and betray one another. And then Yeshua also said, woe to him who causes offenses to one of the little ones. Okay? So we need to be on guard and fully equipped and have full understanding of that when this period of time comes, and it's progressive, it increases over a period of time till it hits a crescendo, but we need to be on guard to make sure that we are fully equipped and fully aware and fully cognizant of this concept, so that we don't fall prey to the enemy and we find ourselves on the wrong side, where we're the ones who are causing the offense and betraying the other person, because we're harboring unforgiveness and we're not having long suffering towards what other people are going through. It is up to us. We are chosen to change the atmosphere. We are the ones who are supposed to do it. We are not supposed to give our power away to somebody else and succumb to their power. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 6 through 7 says, since it is a righteous thing with Yahweh to repay with tribulation, which is a pressure that is burdensome on those who trouble through afflicting you, and to give you who are troubled rest with us, with the Master Yeshua, when he is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels. Okay? So we only have a small taste of the rest right now, but our goal is to look forward to the time when we have our eternal rest. As the scripture says, the present sufferings of this age are not worthy to be compared to the glory that's about to be revealed later. So right now, what we're suffering with these situations with people that are giving us a difficult time is nothing compared to what the benefits will be in the kingdom. When we look back, we're going to say, this is nothing. And I'm sure right now, if you're up in age a little bit, you look back 15 or 20 years ago at something you were going through at that time, and you look back on it and you think, wow, I was really traumatized in that situation. But now 15, 20 years later, you're looking back and you're thinking to yourself, it really wasn't that big of a deal, I made it out to be worse than what it was. And we as humans, as creatures we're that way. We tend to over-exaggerate things. A lot of times we sit and we imagine a calamity that's going to come upon us, and it's 99 times worse than what it actually wound up being. If you really stop and think about it and you look back, most of the things that you went through, you imagined what it was going to be. It was going to be far worse than what it actually turned out to be. And in a lot of those cases, it actually turned out to your benefit. So we have a pretty wild imagination as human beings, and we need to bring those imaginations under control. So at the end of the day, what Yahweh wants is he wants us to let go, so that he can take over, because at the end of the day also, we are not designed to bear this kind of a burden. We are not. We were not constructed to bear this kind of a burden. Yeshua was the only one who could take that. And the thing is, we put our own millstones around our neck, and we choke ourselves in our own situations. We create a lot of our own dramas. You know, if you think about it, we, and I'm not just going to say Americans, probably worldwide, we take more pills to sleep at night than we ever have, because we're under more stress. A lot of it is self-induced. A lot of times we surround ourselves with people who are drama queens, who create all kinds of scenarios in your life, and you probably should be getting rid of some of these people. If they're driving you to the point where you're taking pills to sleep at night, or to calm your nerves, or you're drinking, and I'll even say some people get pushed so far to the edge that you actually commit suicide. And so this is, if you've gotten to that point, you're already really too far down the road, and you should have stopped the insanity long before all this took place. You know, all of us love the concept, I mean, I'm talking in the flesh, I'm not talking in the spirit. All of us love the concept of when we have a confrontation with another person, we're going to tell that person exactly how we feel, because we're going to put them in their place and we're going to straighten them out. And this is what comes natural in the flesh to us humans. A lot of us enjoy doing that. That's the pride that's within us. And this is something that we should not be doing. So at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're exalting ourselves over the other person. And we're not supposed to be exalting ourselves over the other person. We're supposed to have compassion for the other person and whatever they're going through. So that at the end of the day means that you have to deny yourself. And that is, at the end of the day also, the only way our circumstances are going to change. You know, if you think about it, it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen a nature program. You got this guy out in the bush, you know, one of these tribal men, and he sets a trap. And what he does is he puts bananas in the trap, and he makes the hole only big enough for the monkey to put his hand through. So then when the monkey goes and he looks for the guy, and the guy walks away, you know, and the monkey's curious, so he goes down and he puts his hand in the trap and he grabs the banana, and he's trying to pull the banana out, but it's now too big to get it out of the hole, you know. And then he sees the tribal man coming, and then he starts to really panic, and he wants that banana, and he doesn't want to let that banana go, and he's holding on to that banana, and then the tribal guy grabs him, and now the monkey becomes the meal for the tribal man. And we're kind of like that. We don't like to let go of the banana that we have in our hand. And what Yeshua is basically trying to show us through the scriptures and admonish us, let go of the banana, metaphorically speaking. Stop entertaining your flesh and allowing you to put people down and judge them incorrectly, especially when you don't know their circumstances, and just let the banana go. And so that way you can have your freedom. Because it is quite a burden to be running around and having grudges against people and unforgiveness against people. And this is just, it's not good for your health, it's not good for your mind, and ultimately it's not good for your salvation as well. You know, the other thing too is what happens is that as human beings, we all have different value systems. Now, in this room, we have various cultures. We have Spanish, we have the black culture, I'm Jewish, we have some other mixed breeds, I won't say who they are, but the point is that we all come from these different cultures, and then from those cultures, we live in this country, we all have different values that we've gotten from different various religious systems that we've come into this faith. And so, you know, our parents brought us up all differently. You know, you can do this, you can't do that. And another person looks at that and says, that's crazy. How in the world can you figure that that's no good? So it's kind of like walking into Baskin Robbins, isn't it? You know, you got the 31 flavors, you know, and that's kind of like me saying, well, vanilla is the absolute best. It's the only flavor you should eat. But somebody else says, I beg to differ with you. I like chocolate. I think chocolate is better than vanilla. You know, at the end of the day, you have to draw a distinctive line between that which is biblical and that which is not. If you want to go into the store and have a vanilla ice cream or a chocolate ice cream, nobody should be complaining to the other person that somehow that's wrong. And so we have to, when we're faced with these situations with people where we have to deal with them in different scenarios, we have to sit down and draw the line between what is biblical, or what they are doing, is it biblical or non-biblical, or does it not really matter? Is it just a personal choice that Yahweh allows us to have with all of us? We all have a certain latitude where we can make our own choices, as long as it's not defiling the Scriptures, obviously. So, anyway, when we start entertaining these ideas where we don't have to have forgiveness and long-suffering, it sets a chain of events where we start having problems, because then what we're doing in essence is we're inviting unclean spirits into our life. And those unclean spirits can manifest in these different ways: anger, judgment, unforgiveness, jealousy, slander, gossip, and enviousness, just to mention a few. These are all things that we need to stay away from. These are detrimental to your spirit. These are things that defile your temple where the Ruach resides. If you allow any of this stuff to come into your temple, you are defiling the temple. And then you become grieved in your spirit. And then you go to the pill taking and the drinking, and you become disillusioned. And once Satan's got you disillusioned, then you're really, really, really in trouble at that point. You do not want to get to a point of disillusionment. So imagine not having to live with all of those negative consequences. So I've got a question. Let me go back here. I've got a question. Do we sympathize with others when we have the same shortcomings as ourselves? I would say yeah. In other words, if you meet a person and they say, and you see them, or they say, I'm having a problem in this area of my life, blah, 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 and you know in your heart that you have exactly the same weakness, your heart tends to bleed for them. That's the natural inclination. But then I would say, also, here's another question: when another person has a weakness that we do not have, do we feel proud and puffed up to the point that we look down on them? Yeah, if we're really honest with ourselves, I think we do. Because we look at that and we say, huh? You got a problem in that area? Really? Are you that lame? Not considering the fact that we ourselves, maybe that person could be looking at us and saying, really? You got that problem? Still, after all these years, you still haven't worked that out? So, you got all these finger pointings that can be going on back and forth. So, the Scripture says that we should not compare ourselves among ourselves. That is something that we're not supposed to be doing. So it's interesting that when we're riding high on life and Yahweh's blessing us, and it seems like we have no trouble in our lives at the time, we tend to look down on somebody else when they're having a rough time. And instead, as part of the body of the Messiah, we should be coming to the aid of that person. And sometimes it might require that you do have to tell the person, look, this is happening because of blah, blah, blah. But we have to do it in a spirit of love and in kindness, considering lest ourselves be tempted. And so to him who extends much mercy is given in return. And so we need to keep that in mind, because there's always going to be a moment in our life when we're going to need mercy. And you better make sure your bank account has a fat account full of mercy where you have extended a lot to other people, because there's going to come a time where you're going to have to draw from that account. And you're going to need to have it there. And if you don't have it there, it's going to be a lonely, lonely trial that you're going to go through. So at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that what a hypocritical game a lot of times we play. And we try not to let anybody else know what we're thinking. But all too many people, and at times I catch myself, and I have to try to correct myself. This is wrong. Should not be doing it. I rebuke it in the name of Yeshua. I ask for forgiveness in it, and help me to correct it and compose myself so that I can come to the person when the time is right, if at all, because it might not be for me to do, it might be for somebody else, and deal with it accordingly. So, long-suffering and forgiveness, well, more so in long suffering, I pretty much have dealt with the concept of long suffering in the idea of dealing with other people. But long suffering isn't necessarily about dealing with other people. It also encompasses circumstances in your life that necessarily do not have anything to do with anybody else. So we go through trials. Sometimes they're very short trials, sometimes they're very long trials. For some people, in some scenarios, it lasts a lifetime. And I've had to tell some people that the decisions you're making today determine tomorrow how long that trial will last. Because the trial will basically stay in your life to the degree until you got it. Once you get it and you understand it, and you've incorporated it into your spirit and you've learned the lesson, then there's really no more need for that trial. Because now you become a kind of professor, so to speak. You become schooled in that trial, you conquered that trial, and now you become an ambassador to be able to help somebody else who is suffering that same thing and help work them through that process to come out of that trial for them as well. They need to be redeemed out of it. Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 15 through 18 to illustrate a point. Now, here's something interesting in this story, because we all know Jeremiah to be a great prophet, but there's some interesting parts that we're going to read here, and I'm going to break it down as quickly as I can, but try not to leave too much out. But Jeremiah was a very frustrated prophet, to the point that he began to detest his ministry. And what he began to do is he began to plead his case to Yahweh. And how many times, and I hope that through this, going through this whole section here, we can all see ourselves at some level in this, in some area of our life, because oftentimes we come before Yahweh and we try to plead our case saying, this isn't right. I shouldn't have to go through this. This should not be happening to me. And here's why I believe it should not be happening to me. And so our self-righteousness rises up, and we make all these clever excuses and how we can plead to the throne of Yahweh how this is not supposed to be happening to me, and I rebuke it and it needs to be removed. Yeah, I've been through a lot of that. So let's go on and read, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down into psychology of the dialogue that was going back and forth between Yahweh and Jeremiah. And it's really interesting when you see how Yahweh looks at what Jeremiah had to say. So, O Yahweh, you know through observing me, remember me and visit me, and take vengeance for me on my persecutors. In your enduring long-suffering patience, do not take me away. Know that for your sake I have suffered rebuke. Your words that give advice were found, and I ate them. I devoured them. And your word was to me the joy and rejoicing of my heart. For I am called by invitation by your name, O Yahweh Elohim of hosts, who are organized for war. I did not sit in the assembly through a secret intimacy of the mockers, who laugh in pleasure, nor did I rejoice. I sat alone because of your hand, for you have filled me with your indignation, which is Yahweh's displeasure of sin. Why is my pain perpetual? In other words, it doesn't end. It just keeps going and going and going. There's just no end to this thing. And my wound incurable, which refuses to be healed? Will you surely be to me like an unreliable stream as waters that fail? Okay. So let's examine what is Jeremiah praying to Yahweh about. It's broken down into three basic points. Okay. Matter of fact, I'll go here. I'll put them up. 1, that Yahweh would consider his case and be mindful of him. 2, that Yahweh would communicate strength and comfort to him. And 3, that he would appear for him against those that did him wrong. We all want to be vindicated, don't we? It is just terrible when people are beating us up and they're slandering us, and we just want Yahweh to come down and incinerate them. This is the attitude we want, and this is where Jeremiah was coming from. So he felt very strongly that he had a legal right to present this case to Yahweh. And so it's very interesting. So, I'll just leave that up there so you can ponder it. Okay, so I'm just going to read just a little bit here. I didn't put this up on the screen. Revenge me of my persecutors, or rather vindicate me from my persecutors. Give judgment against them, and let that judgment be executed so far as necessary. for my vindication and to compel them to acknowledge that they have done me wrong. So this is what I just said. So he's pleading to them, enough is enough. I'm doing this ministry. I'm speaking your word. The people aren't listening. They're angry. They're insulting me. They're doing this to me. They're doing that to me. This ain't right. I want you to do something about it. Okay? All right, so this is what he's saying. Let something be done to convince the world that whatever blasphemers say to the contrary, you are a righteous person, and that whom you serve is a righteous Elohim. Next, that he would yet spare him and continue him in the land of the living. The best men will give themselves up to Yahweh's wrath because they are indebted to his patience for the continuance of their lives. Though in a passion he complained of his birth. So in other words, he even cursed the day that he was born, because he's had to deal with all this stuff. And how many of us have gone through things in our lives where just some days you feel so down and out, you just really wish you were never here to experience this in the begin with. If you're human, you've probably been through that. Yet he desires here that his death might not be hastened, for life is sweet to nature, and the life is useful to the person is so to grace. So, he pleads to Yahweh for mercy and relief against his enemies, persecutors, and slanderers. That Yahweh's honor was important in this case. Now, know and make it known that for thy sake I have suffered rebuke. So here he is pleading again. Yahweh, I'm doing this job and I'm suffering rebuke for your name's sake, okay? Those that lay themselves open to reproach by their own fault have great reason to bear it patiently, but no reason to expect that Yahweh should appear for them. But it is for the doing well that we suffer ill, and for righteousness' sake that we have all manner of evil set against us. We may hope that Yahweh will vindicate our honor with his own. To the same purport, in verse 16, it says, I am called by thy name, O Yahweh of hosts. It was for that reason that his enemies had hated him. And I experience this, I don't know if any of you do, but whenever I say the name of Yahweh or Yeshua, I get some people who get outright irate about it. They hate that name. They really hate that name. And if you're called by that name and you're doing the works of the Father in that name, even if you're not mentioning name, just the works alone of what you're doing will bring anger into people who will launch out against you. And therefore, for that reason, he promised himself that Yahweh would own him and stand by him. Next, that the word of Yahweh, which he was employed to preach to others, he had experienced the power and pleasure of in his own soul, and therefore had the graces of the Spirit to qualify him for divine favor, as well as his gifts. We find some rejected of Yahweh who yet could say, Yahweh, we have prophesied in thy name, and it was not so. That he had applied himself to the duty of his office with all possible seriousness and self-denial, though he had had of late but little satisfaction in it. So what it's saying is he poured himself out into his ministry. He was doing everything that Yahweh had commanded him to do. So nobody could say that he was negligent in his ministry. So whether it's a ministry or it's your walk in Yeshua, we cannot be negligent in it, okay? But it became so grievous in the experiences of what he was having, to the point that he was losing long suffering with what he was going through in his ministry, in his walk with Yahweh, to the point that he was finding little pleasure in it. And when you start walking in Yeshua and you start having the trials and the burdens are hitting you, and you feel like you're in a fist fight with 15 different guys and you're getting so many fists smacking your face to the point that you don't even know where the next one's coming from, and you're becoming disillusioned, that is certainly a point that you could get to where you're finding very little pleasure in what you're going through. And so this is what happened with Jeremiah. It was his comfort that he had given himself wholly to the business of his office and had done nothing either to divert himself from it. Next, he throws himself upon Yahweh's pity and promise in a very passionate disapproval. We are willing to make the best we can of it and to take it as an appeal. How many of us go through the throne thinking that we are righteous and have done no wrong, and we plead our case like Jeremiah, which is what I was saying before? And I think the basic lesson here is a lot of times when we go through things like this, how we see the experience is not how Yahweh sees the experience. And like I said earlier, nothing happens to you unless Yeshua allows it. And if he's allowing it, it's for a purpose. And so if you're going to look at it through the eyes of the flesh, which is, why is this happening to me? This is not right. This is not justifiable. I rebuke it. I don't accept it. I will not embrace it. Then you're already in trouble. You're already in trouble because you've missed the point and you've missed the boat. There's a design and a reason why this has come upon you, and the way you're supposed to behave towards it or respond to it depends upon the questions that you ask yourself. So depending on what kind of paradigm you have, how you view the trial will determine how you respond. How you respond will determine what the outcome is. And if you respond negatively, the outcome will be negative, and the trial will continue to endure until you get the point. Because he's trying to prepare you for the kingdom. He does not have all day to do this. He has a time frame that he's working with. He wants you to bear fruit. And so we need to get in agreement with him. Okay, Yahweh, now we're going to take a look real quick here at how Yahweh responds to Jeremiah's plea. So let's look at his mindset. Through the prophet, though the prophet betrayed much humility, human frailty in his address, yet Yahweh answered him with good words and comfortable words, for he knows our frame. Okay, Yahweh here requires of him, as a condition of further favors, he designed him. Jeremiah had done and suffered much for Yahweh, yet Yahweh is no debtor to him. So think about that. Yahweh is no debtor to us. He doesn't owe us anything. And so for us to unrighteously come before his throne and command that he has to do something can be a very dangerous thing. So again, that comes down to knowing what his will is, because there are times when we do have to demand something from him, but it's a very, very complex subject in which you have to really make sure you know that your heart is right and you fully understand what his will is before you open your mouth and get that arrogant. Okay? Because we are to come boldly before the throne, but you got to be careful about how you do that. All right. Let's see here. But he is still upon his good behavior. Yahweh will own him, but, one, he must recover his temper. So he had a problem with temper. He had obviously gotten so far down the road, so upset, so disillusioned with everything that was going on in his life in the ministry, to the point that he had gotten angry. And that's what happens, isn't it? When you keep getting afflicted over and over again, you know, in the beginning you might shrug it off a little bit, but then it just keeps wearing on you and wearing, and then you start really getting upset in your flesh. And then comes the acting out. You know, that's the general process of how this works. And so we need to stop this long before that happens. And again, it comes down to what empowering question are you asking yourself about the trial you go through. If you're asking yourself an empowering question, you will get an empowering answer. If you ask yourself a disempowering question, you will get disempowerment in return. So it's the quality of the questioning that you presenting about the circumstance as you are experiencing will determine what direction it goes into. Okay. And be reconciled to his work. So Yahweh is also telling them, you need to be reconciled to your work. I know you're upset. I know you're angry. I know you're frustrated. I know you've lost long suffering and so forth. But you need to get this under control, and you need to be reconciled back to it. That is tough, because once you've gone down that far down the road, it is really hard to come all the way back. It's kind of like a marriage that got really, really bad. I mean, really bad. To the point where one spouse is saying, well, I want to reconcile. And you're saying, are you kidding me? If I had a knife right now, I'd cut you up in a bunch of pieces and nobody would be able to find you. And when you've got that much anger and unforgiveness going on inside, and the other one wants to restore the relationship, that's a hard road. A really hard road. But this is what he was dealing with. And his friends with it again. So apparently it may very well be that friends that he had in this walk that he had maybe because of his anger that he got into and his frustration and his bitterness and his unforgiveness, maybe those friends got lost. How many times did that happen with us? That we were friends with people and we're walking along and then something happens and then there's a breakup in the relationship, and you can't seem to get back to that person, and they're either angry or you're angry or both are angry. And so what he's telling me, in other words, it's reconciliation. You need to be reconciled back. This is basically what he's saying. And not quarrel with it anymore. Don't argue about it. Stop fighting and bucking the system. Stop it. Just stop arguing about it. Don't quarrel anymore. Just do what I'm telling you to do. I know what's better for you than you do. And this is the message that he's trying to convey to us. As he had done. He must return, must shake off this distressful discontent, thoughts and passions, and not give way to them, must regain the peaceable possession and enjoyment of himself, and resolve to be easy. Note that when we have stepped aside into any disagreement frame or way, our care must be to return and compose ourselves to a right temper of mind again, and then we may expect Yahweh will help us if we then endeavor to help ourselves. We must resolve to be faithful in his work, or he could not expect the divine protection any longer than he did approve himself so. Though there was no cause at all to charge Jeremiah with unfaithfulness, and Yahweh knew his heart to be sincere, yet Yahweh saw fit to give him his caution. He gave him this caution. Those that do their duty must not take it lightly. To be told their duty, in two things he must be faithful. He must distinguish between some and others of those he preached to. So when you're preaching or you're speaking to people, you have two camps. And he wants you to recognize that you have two camps. Okay? And it's not really my goal to get into that here. That's another subject. Though thou must take forth the precious from the vile. So you must be able to separate the sheep from the goat, in other words. Okay? The righteous are the precious, be they ever so mean and poor. The wicked are the vile, ever so rich and great. In our congregations, these are mixed, wheat and chaff, in the same floor. We cannot distinguish them by name, but we must by character. So you must look at the end of the day at the character of people, not their personality. People have personalities that can be very deceiving. That's not what you're supposed to judge. You're supposed to judge their character. Or through the character is where the fruit will be manifest, because we're told you'll know them by their fruit. So the fruit stems from what kind of character they have. So let's go on. And must give to each portion, speaking comfort to precious saints and terror to the vile sinners, neither making the heart of the righteous sad, nor strengthening the hands of the wicked. He must closely adhere to his instructions and not in least vary from them. Let them return to thee, but return not thou to them. That is, he must do the most he can in his preaching to bring people up to the mind of Yahweh. Those that had left off from him, that did not like the terms upon which Yahweh's favor was offered to them. Let them return to thee and be upon second thoughts. Come up to the terms and strike a bargain. But do not return to them, do not compliment them, nor comply with them, nor think to make the matter easier to them than the word of Yahweh has made it. Men's hearts are like lies, must come up to Yahweh's law or his Torah and comply with that. For Yahweh's law will never come down and comply with them. So we're supposed to be in a position of authority. And so you must be able to distinguish the difference between those who are the believers in Yeshua, who are trying to walk the right way, although not so perfectly, and those who are fighting against Yahweh's law completely. And so those there, you have to treat them in a completely different way. All right. What Yahweh has promises to him upon the performance of these conditions, if he approves himself well. Yahweh will tranquilize his mind and pacify the present tumult of his spirits. If thou will return, I will bring thee again, will restore thy soul, as Psalms 23:3 says. The best and strongest saints, if at any time they have gone aside out of the right way and are determined to return, need the grace of Yahweh to bring them again. Yahweh will employ him in his service as a prophet, whose work, even in those bad times, had comfort and honor, though in it was his own wages. So in, let's see, I think I put this up. Yeah, verse 19, thou shalt stand before me to receive the instructions from me as a servant from his master, and thou shalt be as my mouth to deliver my message to the people, as an ambassador is the mouth of the prince that sends him. Okay. Then it goes on to say, he shall have strength and courage to face the many difficulties he meets within his work, and his spirit shall not fail again as it now does. So he's talking about restoration. There's always a chance for restoration. No matter how far down the road you may have allowed yourself to go, if you'll just decide in your mind you're going to return back, he will restore you. And it seems to imply here that you'll actually be stronger than you were before. And why? Because you've learned from the mistakes of where you've allowed yourself to fall. And so that gives you more wisdom, but it also should give you more desire to make sure that you never allow that to happen again. Because the trial will bring so much pain and suffering. You know, in psychology they say that in human psychology there's basically two levels of motivation. Pain versus pleasure. It's really that simple. Pain versus pleasure. Humans, they've found, will over 80% of the time do more to avoid pain than even to gravitate towards pleasure. So pain is a great motivating force in people's life. And this is what this is basically explaining here. And so sometimes when we are going through a painful process where we're having a hard time being long-suffering with somebody that we don't want to be long-suffering towards or we don't want to forgive, the pain that comes from that experience is a teacher. And you hopefully get, and that happened to me. I used to go through a lot of that in my earlier years in the walk with Yeshua. And I used to get very, very easily agitated and offended by people. And eventually I just got to the point, I said, you know what, this is insanity. You know, this is insanity. I'm repeating the same cycle of defeat over and over again. You know, and I become estranged to these people and they look that way, I look that way, we don't talk to each other. I said, this has got to stop because I'm getting sick over this. It's looping a tape in my mind. I'm repeating the same things over and over again and I just can't get out of this cycle of defeat. So there comes a point where you have to hit the stop button and say, I don't want to hear that recording anymore. It needs to stop. I need to make this change. Okay, verse 20. I will make thee unto this people as a fenced, brazen, made of metal wall that protects. So now what he's saying is, now I'm going to build like a fortress around you. I'm going to really make you strong now. I'm going to add some extra protection because I already see what happened the first time when you did this ministry. These people affected you in an adverse way that caused you to stumble. But now I'm going to build this fortress around you that's made of metal. It's really strong. That's going to make it very difficult for people to get through. He actually said the same thing to Ezekiel too in chapter 4. He says, I make you to live amongst serpents and scorpions, but I will make your head, your forehead, as hard as a diamond. And why serpents and scorpions? Because Israelites are known as serpents and scorpions. They spew a lot of venom. That's what they do. And he had to tolerate, and in the body of Yeshua, we have a lot of serpents and scorpions. And you have to have a head as hard as a diamond to not allow that to penetrate your spirit to the point where it causes you to find yourself in a scenario like Jeremiah. So let's go on. Which the storm batters and beats violently upon, but cannot shake. Return not thou to them by any sinful compliance, and then trust thy Elohim to arm thee by his grace with the holy resolutions. Be not cowardly, and Elohim will make you daring. Expect to be so, Yahweh says. They will fight against you. So in other words, he's telling them, when you go back out there in this renewed structure of fortress that I built for you, they're going to come at you. They're going to come right back at you. As a matter of fact, they'll probably come at you stronger than they did the first time. Because they already know that they opened up a can of well, I'm not going to say that. They opened up an assault on you, okay? And they drove you off. So now they're looking at you that you're weak. So when they see you come back, they're thinking, he's weak. So now I'm going to really whoop his rear end this time. you know? But what they don't realize is what Yahweh just got done telling him. And so they're going to meet a fortress that they're going to try to batter against with everything they got, and they're not going to be able to prevail against them. And so that's the promise that he had, okay? All right. He also, I didn't put in there, but he also complained that he was a man of strife. And so in other words, he had a kind of spirit. Paul said the same thing. Paul was a man of strife and contention. He was a guy that was full of adversity. And so apparently Jeremiah had the same kind of issues. So, I'm sorry, let me go back here just a little bit. Okay, so let's see here. So at the end of the day, many things appear frightful to us, but they really are not. It's just our flesh allowing us to perceive that it's frightful. And it's at the moment when we don't stand with Yahweh and with Yeshua and allow them to be our fortress is when our faith diminishes, and that's when the enemy can prevail over top of us. So let's take a quick look here at what causes us not to allow the spirit of long-suffering and forgiveness. Pride, which is quenching of the Holy Spirit. You need the Holy Spirit actively working at every single moment, because when these situations come against you, you cannot have it quenched. If it's quenched, then you're going to be in the flesh and you're going to respond in the flesh. Okay? Ignorance, not understanding what Yahweh requires of you. Lack of coping skills. I find this to be an issue, probably the most prevalent with a lot of people, is they don't know how to cope with adversity with another person. They take it personally. They feel a personal offense when something occurs. So that's one of them. When a person is troubling you, there are two things going on. One, Satan is using the skills of that person to try to afflict you, to try to crack your armor to get you into the flesh so that you can take on the same spirit that that person has just taken on. Remember, you were chosen to change the atmosphere. When you mirror the spirit of the other person, you have just given your power over to the other person. And you've abdicated your heavenly responsibility. You must be on guard at all times to not allow that to happen. Because once that happens, long-suffering and forgiveness cannot play itself out. It can't function in that kind of a spirit. The other one is we must realize at the end of the day that the other person is going through a trial that they have not yet come to understand. And so what they are really doing is they're looking for, many times when people act out in a situation, they're in pain. It's a sign that they're in pain and they need help, but they don't know how to ask for help. It's because it's pride, or it's because they don't really understand the root of what they're going on. So if you don't implement long-suffering and you don't implement forgiveness, then you can't see through what is the physical manifestation of their acting out is. Or it could be the words they're saying, and it holds you captive because you're now no longer in a position of authority where you have the ability to perceive and allow the spirit of discernment to show you what is going on in the spirit of that person so that you can now intervene and help them instead of having a pity party with them. We don't want to be doing that. As mentioned from the beginning, long-suffering and forgiveness is one of the toughest of the fruits of the Spirit to develop. It really is. Because you really have to deny the flesh to be able to do that. Jeremiah struggled with long-suffering and forgiveness in his ministry because of all the trials that wore him down. And really that's what Satan is doing. He's trying to wear us down. And just sometimes you get hit with a little thing here or there, and sometimes it's just a barrage. It's just one situation right after another, and you just don't see any way out. And that's what he wants us to do. He wants us to cry, uncle. He wants us to cry uncle and say, that's it, I've had enough, I give up, this is too difficult to do. You know, just take it away from me, okay? But simply just saying it is not enough. You have to really do it. You have to really inculcate it into your spirit. And you have to implement these paradigms that I was talking about. Because once you have those belief systems structured within you, and you support those belief systems with other belief systems, it is not so easy for the devil to overtake you so quickly anymore. Very difficult. Very difficult. So it comes down to a structured belief system that you must implement within your spirit. Okay? Here's a few to ponder. I am commanded to be long-suffering with this person. Do not take it personally. I am commanded to be long-suffering with this person. Do not take it personally. So no matter what they say or what they do, you're not to take it personally. The moment you personalize it, you're in trouble. You're already in trouble if you personalize it. Another one to ponder. It is only the other person who has a fault in their character that they may have not yet learned to deal with yet. This is another empowering question you could ask yourself. This is the first things that should be coming to your mind when you're faced with a situation, and not become reactionary. If you become reactionary, you're in the flesh. Before you even know it, you're already in the flesh. And you're going to respond accordingly. And that means you're already in trouble. And that means you're going to eventually have to eat crow or a bitter pill. Another one to ponder. Their negativity is actually a cry for help because it is based on frustration. They're frustrated. They don't know how to cope with whatever they're going through. They're crying out. They need help. They just don't know how to deal with it. They're trapped in a cage and cannot find a way out. You cannot allow them to get into the flesh. You cannot allow yourself to get into the flesh to be like them, or we both become victims. Because once you're a victim and he's a victim or she's a victim, then you're in trouble. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1. Here's another thing to ponder. A soft, tender as weak answer turns back to the starting point, away wrath, which is a poisonous fever. A poisonous fever. But a harsh word stirs up anger to the point of rapid breathing. Okay? Verse 2. The tongue of the wise who are intelligent and skillful uses knowledge rightly. This is what I'm trying to convey. These are principles that are wisdom principles. And when you implement those wisdom principles, then you can use it rightly instead of using it wrongly, which is what the flesh wants you to do. But the mouths of fools who are stupid and silly pours as a foul odor forth foolishness. Okay. So actually, if we succumb to somebody else's temptation to get into the flesh, we're actually worse off than they are. Because what we're basically saying through omission, we're basically saying they have more power and influence than I do. Because they seduced me in the same spirit as what they're in. So now we're both stuck. Okay? Never, ever, ever allow anybody to take your power. Never, ever, ever allow anyone to take your power. You must at all times maintain your own composure. Yeshua maintained his composure in every circumstance he found himself into. He did not let anybody rattle his cage. When you know who you are in the Messiah and you understand the word, no matter what somebody tries to say to you, they cannot rattle your cage. You got to get comfortable in your own skin, so to speak. Okay? And you can't let your guard down, although that's not so easy because life has many distractions and it's easy to, get distracted on the street corner somewhere and be talking to somebody and step out into traffic not thinking, then you get hit by a car. It can happen in an instant. But the point is you need to be cognizant at all times as much as possible that you don't find that happening to you. If you find yourself struggling with an issue, remember this. James chapter 1, verse 2 through 8. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials that are evil solicitations. So when these things come into your presence, it's an evil solicitation. But you're supposed to count it all joy when that does happen. Okay? Knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, which is a continual waiting. This is what Jeremiah didn't do. He just got frustrated, threw his hands up in the air and said, that's it, I had enough, I can't go through this anymore. Verse 4, but let patience have its perfect work, which is the development of moral character. That's the point of it, okay? That you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So when you don't lack anything, it's a great place to be. But in life, when you come up short all the time, or you got to pay your bills at the end of the month and you're coming up $100 short, and if you don't get it paid by that day, they're going to turn off the electric. That's a bad place to be, okay? And that means you are lacking. So you got to change the circumstances. Okay, nothing so that you are not destitute. Verse 5, If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask, to the point of begging. You're supposed to ask to the point of begging of Yahweh, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to them. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave that surges high of the sea, driven and tossed by agitation by the wind. This is what others do when they come into our presence and they try to agitate us. It's the same concept. Okay? They want to turn your life upside down. They want a wave to come over you so strongly to the point it just engulfs you. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from Yeshua. He is double-minded with the two spirits, man, unstable and inconsistent in all his ways. That's what a double-minded person is. One moment he says he's going to do this, the next moment you watch him and he's doing the exact opposite. How many of us find ourselves doing that? We're double-minded. We're not fully persuaded by whatever the precept is that the Word is trying to tell us. Okay. Yahweh does want to preserve you, but He won't force you. If you notice what He said to Jeremiah, He told him, these are the three things that you need to go do. It's not incumbent upon Yahweh to do it. It's incumbent upon us to take the initiative from the instruction and go and do it. And then you will see the fruit that comes out of it. So it's a decision. Either you do it or you don't. And I will say, there are some women out there who were once married to another man. And now they're married to a new man. And I will say that because some of those women have not forgiven their first husband, are taking it out on their second husband. And guess what? That husband, that second husband, will never see the real wife. He'll never get to experience her as long as she doesn't let go what the first husband did. And recognize that what she's doing to the second husband is inflicting wounds and damages on him to the point that that relationship will never be able to grow beyond that point. And likewise, husbands, some of you have a wife now that you fight with and you quarrel with and you contend with. And you see that all of the relationships you had with other women before have scarred you to the point that you've come to realize and recognize that women are nothing but to be controlled. And so that wife will never see the real husband. That wife will never see the real husband. We're all cheating ourselves through these behaviors because we find it too painful to sit down and examine ourselves first, because we're not even long-suffering with ourselves. We don't even forgive ourselves. The Scripture says that we're to love our neighbor as ourselves, but you can only love your neighbor to the degree that you actually love yourself. But if you're harboring all kinds of stuff inside of you that you don't want to deal with, how in the world can you love the neighbor? How in the world can you really love your spouse when you've got all this garbage built up inside that you don't want to get rid of, and you don't want to face it because you're afraid, and you want to go hide like Jeremiah wanted to hide and just get away from everybody? And so what happens is the wife closes up inside a little box and she puts a lock on it, and the husband basically has a sign on the front that says, "Do not enter. You're not welcome here in that area of my life," because she shut it off. And likewise with husbands. Husbands put themselves into a little box and they tell the wife, "Don't come in here, you're not welcome, because I don't want to open myself up to be in more pain. And I see all women as the same. And therefore, I am not going to make myself vulnerable so that you can come and do to me what all these other women did to me in my past relationships." And it's a sad scenario. But this is what we do to ourselves. We inflict pain upon ourselves and we don't forgive ourselves. So it becomes difficult to forgive somebody else because we have so much pain, we want to see other people in pain. And instead, we need to be healed so that we can see other people be healed as well. So At the end of the day, what am I saying? We've been given a ministry of reconciliation. But how can you have a ministry of reconciliation when you don't even reconcile with yourself? And I'm speaking to me too. I'm not speaking just to throw stuff out there. I'm speaking to me too. We're entering into some very, very difficult times, and it's time to get real. We can't keep playing these games anymore. I see too many people, and I include myself, playing games, and it's time to get cleaned up. It's time to get cleaned up. Your past does not have to equal your future. You write your destiny. But it's already been written in the heavenlies. It's for you to discover what it is. But you'll only get to that point relative to how obedient you are going to be to what Yahweh wants for your life. You have a divine mandate, and you need to reach that mandate. You need to fulfill that mandate so that you can stand before the throne and nothing can be said against you. If you feel like your prayers are not answered and your life is unhappy and full of disappointments, it may be you're harboring unforgiveness somewhere. And it might be it's just yourself. Somebody told me once that their wife was not forgiving them. And it came through another person who knew nothing about them. That the wife was harboring something against the man she needed to forgive him, and she didn't know who it was. But it's her own husband. And the same is true for husbands with the wives. So if you can learn to forgive yourself, you will then find it easier to forgive others and have long suffering as well. That is the goal. Remember, we are told to love our neighbor as ourselves, as I stated before. And so how can you do that if you don't face it within your own life? We have to forgive ourselves, because if Yeshua forgave us, then why do we not forgive us? Why do we want to hold on to this stuff? And comments, we call comments is dirt, it's garbage, okay? At the end of the day, let's get down to the heart of the matter. It's about forgiveness. It's about forgiveness. I hope that what I have spoken today has touched you somewhere that's unique to you and has given you something to think about. I see a lot of low heads, so it must have touched something. And I speak for myself as well. So I'm not above or below anybody else. So with that, I'm going to finish praying. Abba, in the name of Yeshua, we just want to bless you and thank you for allowing us the privilege to come before your throne on this Sabbath, to seek your face and to seek your will and to humble ourselves, that we may come to a greater understanding of how complex this life is and what your will is for each and every one of us as individuals and collectively. We just want to bless you and thank you for your long suffering and for your forgiveness and for what Yeshua did on the execution stake by shedding his blood for us and atoning for us. Help us, Abba, with our inadequacies. Help us with wrong belief systems that steer us in the wrong direction and don't allow us to be able to fix problems that could easily be fixed because we don't know how to cope with it or we don't know how to approach it. Allow your Ruach HaKodesh to anoint us, Yahweh, to have a spirit of ministry of reconciliation, that we can reconcile those back to us who have been estranged, that was maybe estranged unnecessarily due to our own doing, our own foolishness. So we pray, Yahweh, in the name that is above all names. And we just want to bless you and acknowledge you in all areas of our life. And we just thank you in the mighty name of Yeshua. Amen. My brothers and sisters, it's about forgiveness. Until next time, Shabbat Shalom.
your beloved is